So today, we're going to talk about one of the most powerful laws ever created, a legal sledgehammer designed to take down entire criminal empires. But here's the thing. This weapon had a massive hidden flaw. It was missing a timer, and it took a huge Supreme Court case to finally set the clock.
It sounds like a punchline to a joke, right? But believe it or not, for years, that was a serious legal question that had judges all over the country completely stumped. It created total chaos, and that's the legal mystery we're getting into today.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll get into why the RICO Act was such a big deal in the first place. Then, we'll look at the huge detail Congress just forgot. We'll explore the legal mess that followed, see how the Supreme Court finally had to jump in, and then we'll break down why their decision still matters so much today.
All right, first things first. We have to understand the tool at the heart of this whole story. You gotta know, the RICO Act wasn't just some other law. No, this was a revolutionary weapon built for a very specific and very dangerous mission.
So RICO was passed back in 1970, and it was a total game changer. For the first time, it let prosecutors go after an entire criminal organization, not just a single crime. Think about it. Instead of just nailing a mob boss for one act of extortion, you could now charge them for being part of a pattern of crime. It gave law enforcement the power to dismantle the whole operation, from the very top all the way down.
But here's where it gets kind of wild. While they were drafting this incredibly powerful law, Congress made a pretty shocking mistake. They completely forgot to include one of the most basic parts of any law that lets you sue someone.
That's right. For civil lawsuits, where one person sues another, the RICO Act had no statute of limitations. There was no deadline. Now, was that on purpose? Almost definitely not. It was probably just an oversight in a giant, super complex law. But the result was total uncertainty. Could someone sue you for a RICO violation that happened 10, 20, even 30 years ago? For a long, long time, nobody had a clue.
A statute of limitations is basically a legal ticking clock. The second something bad happens, that clock starts ticking, and the victim only has a certain amount of time to file a lawsuit. It's all about fairness, right? You can't just have these legal threats hanging over someone's head forever. And RICO didn't have one.
So, with no official time limit from Congress, the courts had to kind of improvise. They decided to borrow a 4-year time limit from other laws, but that just created an even bigger, messier problem. Okay, we have a 4-year clock, but when do we start it? This question, what lawyers call accrual, kicked off a massive legal tug-of-war across the entire country.
And this is where things got really confusing, because courts split into two different camps. On one side, you had the last predicate act rule. A predicate act is just one of the crimes in the pattern, like bribery or fraud. So imagine you were defrauded by a criminal ring in 1980, but they kept running their scam until 1990. Under this rule, your 4-year clock to sue wouldn't even start until 1990. Then other courts used the discovery rule, which said, no, the clock starts the second you find out you've been hurt. Two totally different answers for the exact same law. It was a mess.
And this chaos just festered for over a decade. You had this powerful law in the books, but nobody could agree on how to apply one of its most basic features. It became obvious this couldn't go on. The legal system needed one clear, final answer. And in 1985, the Supreme Court finally stepped in.
And that brings us to the main event, the case of Sedima v. Imrex. Now, you'd think this would be some big mob takedown, but funnily enough, it was actually a dispute between two businesses. But this case became the battlefield where the future of all civil RICO lawsuits would be decided, once and for all.
And the Supreme Court's decision was decisive. They threw their weight behind the discovery rule. The justices basically said, look, this is just the clearest and most logical way to do it. Instead of getting tangled up in the criminal's complicated timeline, let's just focus on one simple, critical moment. The moment the victim figured out they'd been wronged.
And this decision was huge. It didn't just resolve one case. It created a single, uniform standard for the entire country. Its legacy is still shaping how these incredibly complex cases are handled to this day.
And so, thanks to the Supreme Court, we have what's now officially known as the injury discovery rule. That's the starting pistol for the statute of limitations in every single civil RICO case.
So how's it work? It's actually really simple. Step 1, someone is harmed by a RICO violation. Step 2, that person finds out they've been harmed or, reasonably should have found out. And step 3, that moment of discovery is when the 4-year clock finally starts to tick. It's practical, it's fair, and it just makes sense.
So what's the big takeaway here? Why does this one rule matter so much? Well, it brought order to chaos.
It created one predictable standard for the whole country. Now everybody, victims and defendants alike, knows the rules of the game. It's also incredibly fair, right? It protects people who might not uncover a really complex fraud for years. And this isn't just about the mob anymore. This rule is the foundation for how all sorts of complex business and white-collar fraud cases are handled today.
When you really think about it, the Supreme Court didn't just interpret the law here. They basically finished writing it. They gave the RICO Act the crucial, missing piece that Congress had accidentally left out more than a decade earlier.
And that leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? The Sedima case is a perfect example of the court stepping in to fix something the legislature missed. It really makes you wonder, when a law is incomplete or silent on a key issue, how much power should judges have to fill in those gaps? It's a fundamental question about the balance of power, and this case puts it right in the spotlight.